and welcome back to the Sustainable Agriculture Workshop hosted by Andrew College. And today we have Ms. Morgan Pinkerton, who is a Sustainable Agriculture and Food System Extension Agent out of Seminole, I hope I pronounced it correctly, Seminole County in Florida. So welcome, Morgan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And it is Seminole County, and I'm located in the heart of Central Florida, not too far from Orlando.
Oh, good, cool. So let me ask you the first question that normally people ask in the interview is like, tell us about yourself. Tell us all about your extension experiences so far.
All right, well, cool. I'll start from the beginning. So I've been an extension agent for just about 2 years now, but when I was in graduate school, I also did a lot of work with extension pretty regularly. So I started extension in the really start of the pandemic. So I started about a month after the shutdowns. So my extension experience has been very unique in my current position, but I'm definitely still through virtual world at first, but also in person now, really getting connected with the local community. And part of my focus is 2 areas: the sustainable agriculture piece, which is working with our local producers and helping them increase the sustainability of their operations. And then also the food systems piece, which is teaching the public ag awareness, trying to get people a little bit more connected with what goes on in the field, and especially when it comes to the locally available produce in our area.
Oh, okay. So build a little bit of education versus a little bit of going out there in the field. I like that. Remember my days of doing that. So you mentioned communication. So what ideas, suggestions, or experiences do you have in relation to the areas of communication, let's say between community learning centers and sustainable ag and environmental development?
So being an extension, I guess I would say I'm a little bit biased that extension really is a great way to communicate and kind of unite a lot of different groups within the population and in the local community. So within that, we do a lot. And specifically in my role, I'm working with all sorts of different groups of people. So I'll talk to schools, community gardens, our local farmers, even local agricultural or interest groups like beekeepers and stuff like that, gardening clubs, and the list really goes on and on. And sometimes that moves up the chain too, where I'll work with our local policymakers and government officials to kind of get them in tune with what's going on in the field and just the educational piece on certain aspects of agriculture. So really the bulk of my job is focused on education, but there is a listening component too. We want to know what's going on in the field, what's going on in the community. So I would say a really big suggestion is to listen to the needs of the community and have that guide a lot of the cool research that's going on in the university level. So it's really a connectiveness and being connected with the community. And now we're living in 2 different worlds. We're living in person and virtual and pretty much everything in between. So we really have to be adaptable to what the local community wants, and it's different everywhere. My county in specific, Seminole County, is very urban. So a lot of people are very excited to see digital technologies being used in that education, but that's not always something that would be great for other communities. So it's really highly dependent on locality, what kind of communication routes you take. But within extension, we're open to using what's best for our local community.
Exactly. So because not one hat fits all. So that's very important to definitely know, because in our county here in Randolph County, we have a lot of conventional farmers around. So our approach to educating these farmers about sustainable ag will have to take a whole different perspective, and different methodology. So that's important. So from your experiences, so it sounds like you have a lot of experience in extension so far, which is great, and you interact with a lot of people. Right. So which is the best way to measure your path towards sustainable agriculture?
I really like this question because I'm kind of going to give you a roundabout answer with it. I would say there really isn't a best way to measure the path towards sustainability. Sustainability has really been a heavily debated word throughout the science community and other communities as well, because the context can really depend on the discipline or the time of the day even. The University of Florida, we have an Office of Sustainability at our university, and they define it as meeting the contemporary needs without compromising the ability of future generations to satisfy their needs. So really, sustainability isn't an end goal. We're not working towards it. It's kind of this journey that we continue to change over time, especially as we learn new things and we have new technology being introduced to the field and researched. And once it becomes available to the producers, it's all about adapting that into what's going on now towards more sustainable practices. And it's something that's very much ongoing.
That's very true. That's so very true. It's really it's like, you know, somebody always says success is about the journey, not really the success. So it's about the journey of becoming sustainable. And that's an interesting perspective. I like that perspective. So you're familiar with conventional farms, right? So do you think that, you know, small farming units, for example, like in Florida or yourself here across here in Georgia, do you think they are more sustainable as compared to bigger farming units?
That's a great question too, and especially being located in Florida, the USDA has their definition, the United States Department of Agriculture, for anyone unfamiliar with that. They have their definition of what a small farming unit would be, and that's a farm that makes about, I believe it's $250,000 or less in sales annually. And for us in Florida, that's 90% of all of our farms in the state are categorized into that small farm unit. So at this time, I don't think there's research, especially within UF, whether or not this size is something that directly relates to sustainability, but it is something that is a question of ongoing research and discussion within the university. But really, no matter the size, commodity, or location of any farm and other characteristics in which you can measure a farm, all of them can adopt more sustainable practices. It kind of goes back to that journey where every farm out there has the ability to work towards that journey.
Right. And once each farm has the opportunity to go on that journey, that's what's important. Yeah, you're so right, because when I think about conventional farms, I more think like where we are in Southwest Georgia, going towards the Midwest, or in New York and stuff like that. But when we come further like south, so if we pass into Georgia, let's say Alabama to an extent going into Florida, you have a lot of smaller farms which make up bigger farms. So that's pretty interesting. So from your experience in visiting different production systems, because I was looking at your videos and your webinar, because you go out there and actually visit a lot of farms, right? So from your experience, you know, what is the relationship between productivity and biodiversity, and how does this vary between agricultural systems as a function of the spatial scale at which land is devoted mostly towards food production?
I think it's really dependent on the farm itself, because each farm operates a little bit differently. Right. And when we think about biodiversity, that's a part of all ecosystems, and farms do have their own unique type of biodiversity. There's even a lot of ongoing research into describing that as an agro-ecosystem now. And just like other ecosystems, they are highly complex. So agroecology itself looks at kind of like a systems thinking of a lot of it. So there's a lot of ongoing research within University of Florida and other institutions looking at the productivity and the biodiversity. And that there is this thought that looking at it from a systems approach can lead to better targets within on-farm practices to increase the sustainability. And just as someone who has a pretty heavy background in entomology and insects myself, I always think about the biodiversity from an insect perspective, though there's other aspects out there. Insects alone on the farm offer a lot of different services, whether it is serving as natural enemies, predators, or parasitoids of pests. They can also serve as food for neighboring wildlife or wildlife in the area. And then pollination services is a really big one too. So it doesn't matter, for example, how good you are at growing blueberries. If you don't have that biodiversity of the pollinators out there, you're going to have lowered yield if you can't achieve that pollination. And here in Florida, a lot of that pollination is dependent on our insect pollinators like bumblebees. And so there's things that producers can do to increase the biodiversity of those pollinators and other insects in the area on their farms and nearby that can lead to increased productivity. But because it is a systems approach of thinking of things, there's a lot of different things at play that can contribute to the productivity of the farm.
I like the word you're using when you say systems, thinking in terms of system, because I always teach my class that you could either think of the farm as a whole, or you could think of a farm as different systems making up the whole. So if you affect one system, the other systems will definitely be affected. So I really like that. I like that analogy you made there. And that is so very true, because and then with all the microorganisms, for example, the insects, that will affect the other systems as well. If you let's say, they get killed or die off or anything like that. So yeah, I really like the system way of thinking. And I think we as agriculture scientists need to think more in that direction with respect to research, instead of studying, the whole, we study the individual systems. So that's pretty great. So that's excellent, actually. So another question would be like, more conventional agriculture uses a ton of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, right? So my question to you, since you visit most of the farms in Florida, in the county, how can food production systems that reduce dependence on externally derived nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium resources could be designed?
That's a really good question, because there is a lot of research being dumped into this right now. Like soil fertility is a very, very hot topic, and kind of going back to that systems approach where we're really starting to think more about soil being part of that system. I'll kind of go back to my background being in extension, that I think the answer to changing the way we think about soil, it lies in the education. And the communication between the researchers who are coming up with these new strategies and new improvements to use on the farm, and communicating that back to the farmers in a way where they can easily adopt practices that reduce the dependence on other sources of nutrients. So it's really a two-way street between the two too, because there can be a lot of great research going on, but if it's not something that's practical to be used in the field, there's going to be low implementations in the field. And extension does play a pretty big role in this type of communication, bringing that science to the farmers, and then also kind of reporting back how it's going, how it's being adopted, and still listening to the needs of the local community.
That's very good. That's a very good answer to that question. And again, it's all about the needs of the farmer, because we need to stress that the research that's being out there should be geared towards solving the farmer's problem. I'm not saying molecular research is not good. I'm not bashing the molecular people, but I'm saying that most of the research that's out there should be geared towards the farmers, because it's their problems we need to solve. And once we solve their problems, we get food to eat. So I think that's something that's really overlooked a lot, especially in the research. And that's where extension comes in. Extension actually pushes that. So I love that. So let me ask you something. As a young female in the agriculture industry, right? I always like to get an appreciation, of this question. So, like, what are the most effective approaches for retaining women in research and extension systems, and that they're surely or wholly involved in both the design of the research as well as the extension systems?
That's a great question. And I definitely, it's something I think about a lot. There's been a lot of discussion lately too, how to retain groups that haven't always been represented in things like agriculture and extension and research and science. And while UFIFIS Extension doesn't have anything that directly says what's the best way to retain women in research and extension, there has been a lot of discussion on continuing to address issues like people's voices not being heard, as well as wage gaps that do still exist in some institutions. So within science especially, sometimes scientists are pretty far removed from the general public, but we've seen in more years an increased need to show people who the scientists really are. So there's been a lot of movements, and some that I've participated in myself through social media and other outlets, like the hashtag "This is what a scientist looks like," hashtag scientist selfies, and things like that. The Women in Science movement that really just brings attention to the fact that there are women in science, and they do a lot of wonderful things, especially those historical things that aren't talked about as much. So continuing the conversation and including women in the conversations is really important, as well as sharing their research and accomplishments with the world.
It's very good because I remember talking to one of my colleagues. She's pretty old in the extension game, and she has said that extension has changed so much, and agriculture has changed so much from like back in the 70s and 80s, where it was male dominated. And now females are getting into that. I must say that's a very good thing, and I'm really proud of that, because it's about equal opportunity all around. So my final question to you, being as a young agriculture professional, right? What advice would you give to, like, for example, a student or somebody who wants to go into the sustainable ag profession, or even wants to go into the extension profession? What advice would you give them?
The best advice that I would have for someone curious about agriculture and extension especially is to follow what interests you, and there's probably a way that you can still be involved in agriculture and extension. It's a conversation that I pretty regularly have with youth. If they're, for example, they're really passionate about graphic design, there's a way they could continue that passion and still support agriculture and support extension, depending on the route you want to take. But I think it's just kind of continuing to explore your options and use your strengths to what works for you, and you can still be involved in agriculture. Get hands-on experience, especially any opportunity you can to do something in the field or work with someone who works in a field you might be interested in. Even if it's not something you end up going into, it could end up being an experience that does change the direction of your education or change the direction of what career path you're following. And I did a lot of internships and a lot of field experiences before I made it into an extension position. And it's because of those experiences that I landed here. And being able to try things out, especially when you're in school, you have a lot of opportunities available that are harder to find once you get out of school and start exploring actual career opportunities.
So, like Morgan said, follow your passion, work on your strengths. That's what's important. Very, very important, especially for the younger generation, because in America, in the US, the age of farming is increasing. So we're not seeing any younger people getting into farming and stuff like that. So that's one thing I want to say, to put out there, is that farming is not just about working in the land, and that's about it. There's so many avenues: the extension, scientists, molecular biologists, microbiologists, so many other careers you could enter in agriculture. So we just need to show the younger generation that, and I think we will have a new crop of farmers coming up from behind. Well, thank you very much, Morgan, for spending some time with us this afternoon. We greatly appreciate it. We just wanted to get an extension specialist insight on sustainable agriculture. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Oh, that's no problem. Okay, bye-bye.